Hey, this is the Daily Overpass. My name is Eric and I make apps. Now today I want to talk about how when your requirements are not clear, you have to quote higher. Alright, so it is a beautiful autumn morning here in England. Right, I grew up in San Diego, so we never really had the leaves changing color in the autumn. And I remember how people would always talk about how I just love the autumn because I love the different colors in the trees and the way they change. And I never understood it because I always thought it kind of means they're dying, doesn't it? But but it is beautiful. It's beautiful out here. So anyway, today I want to talk about quoting because it's something that I think a lot of software developers find difficult. I find it difficult. You don't want to quote too high because you don't want to lose the job, and you don't want to quote too low because you don't want to get scope creep and get caught out with a bunch of stuff that you don't understand. And a lot of times I emphasize the ballpark figure. So before we will give a proper quote where we sit down and hash out all the requirements, we try to give a ballpark. So finger in the air, this based on what you've told me, this is how much I think it's going to cost. And that can be difficult too. I find the developers I work with, they find this really difficult. The same thing, they don't want to end up saying it's going to be, this task will be 8 hours and then find out they didn't have all the information they needed. So they kind of, but they don't want to go too high either, because if they do have all the information they need, whatever. And if anybody's out there's ever been burned by scope creep, and as software developers, I think we've all been burned by scope creep at some point. You know how difficult this can be. Now, years ago, we're talking like 2006 maybe, I went on a Scrum Master course to become a certified Scrum Master. And if you've ever been on the course, if you ever read a bit about Scrum, there's this part in there called planning poker. So you use story points, and all the developers will get together and they'll think this task will be this much, and you assign points of how difficult you think it would be, not necessarily time, but you could do it with time. And then you play poker, so you get to a consensus of how long you think it would be, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. The one bit of advice that came in on this was they said, if you're not sure about the requirement, you should go on the higher side, right? Never go low thinking it's going to be easier than you thought. Always assume it's going to be harder than you thought, because that way you won't be caught out. So we do this when we give ballpark quotes. I always give a range. Between, it could be between this amount and this amount. And a lot of times the clients, especially if they haven't really worked on a software project before, they will say, well, I want the lower one, right? You say, yeah, but it depends on what you do. And sometimes I'll give somebody a ballpark quote and they'll say, oh, that's way outside what I thought it was gonna be, which is good. It's good to find that out first. It's good to find that out before you sit down with them, spend hours or days or weeks doing all the requirement gathering. It's good to find out if the ballpark's gonna fit, right? But a lot of times I have to have this disclaimer on a ballpark figure saying, this could go lower as we get more definition to it. So sometimes, you're like, for example, here's something like that we hear a lot in an app. Users should be able to communicate with each other and send each other messages. So in my mind, that means we have a server, we have push notifications getting sent out, we store the messages, so if somebody joins the chat late, they get that information, but that might not be what they want. Maybe they want SMS going forward, so it's just a one-shot deal. Go into the SMS API and send it, and then you're not really worrying about storage costs or anything like that. So that's something where it could be a big range. It could be, if we're talking about SMS and just sending it one time, we're not storing anything, we don't need a server presence, that's the kind of thing which that would be easy. That's like, well, could be hours really. Or are we talking about we're gonna have to set up this whole chat infrastructure API, or people gonna be able to send each other private messages, or gonna be able to attach images, all that kind of stuff, and that could take a long time. But the point I'm trying to make today, for those of you guys who are starting to work with clients, or who you plan on working with clients at some point in the future, when in doubt about requirements, always err on the high side. Always give a range, think it could be as low as this, but it could be as high as this, and you want to give that ballpark figure first, because if you don't, you can spend a lot of time quoting on something and they just can't afford it. It's not their fault they can't afford it, they just don't know, and you have to give them an indicator early on. Ballparks are hugely expensive, but if you're not sure, Anytime a requirement is unclear, and I mean unclear like we haven't specified it out so we know exactly what's happening, then you have to make that quote a little bit higher. So let me know if you disagree with me. I know a lot of you guys do quote for client work, and you might find that you might disagree with that. But anyway, that is it for today. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow.